Permission to speak, address the body, please.
May proceed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know, many of you know, and some of you don't, but I think the gentleman from Leslie and I are probably the only two members of this legislative chamber that have actually worked underground in the coal mines. I worked for about 2 years at Hamilton Mutual's #1 mine. It was an Island Creek coal job in Union County in West Kentucky. And I can tell you one thing, when you go down into that tunnel, into that darkness, you become very much aware. You become very much dependent on the light. Now, most of you have seen we have these hard hats that have the little light on it, and you kind of shine that light where you need to. And, I can remember one time leaving the mines and going on the road, and I had a flat tire. And I got out, and it was about almost dark, and I was out there trying to change the flat tire. And all of a sudden, I caught myself trying to move my head so that I could shine a light on the tire because I didn't hardly have enough light. So you really do become very much aware and very much dependent about the light. And light is so much important. And hope is part of the light, and freedom is part of the light. And for years, Kentucky has been a state that we've been able to have the freedom to choose our own sources for energy to produce electricity. And we've been able to use what we had that was abundant here. And because of that, our light has shined very bright in this state. We've actually become a very energy dependent state, a very industrial oriented state because of our cheap electricity rates. I think some of you have heard me say this before, but the average state in the nation, about 20 to 27% of their electricity goes to large industrial customers. But in Kentucky, 49%, almost half of our electricity goes to large industrial customers. Ladies and gentlemen, those are jobs for our constituents. That's hope for our constituents. That's light at the end of the tunnel that they can raise their families and feed their kids and try to provide a better life for their children than what they had for themselves. But ladies and gentlemen, for the last 7 years, there's kind of been a dimming of that light out there. There's been a little bit of darkness out there because this administration in Washington no longer approves of our ability to make our own choices. They think in some elitist way and some narcissistic way that only they have an understanding of what we ought to use and what we ought to be part of our lives. They really believe that their opinion is so much more intelligent than ours that our opinions really doesn't matter. And so for the last 7 years, one regulation after another, they've tried to eliminate our way of life and the things that we use here in Kentucky. And it really might be understandable if they really were going to have some meaningful effect on the carbon reductions that we're seeing worldwide. But as we are the only country in the world that you cannot build a new coal-fired power plant. Matter of fact, there are over 2,000 of them being proposed between now and 2030 across the world. China is adding a new coal-fired power plant equivalent of about 700 megawatts every 10 days, and they plan to do that for the next 10 years. India is looking at adding another 446 coal-fired power plants. As a matter of fact, just the increased carbon that India will bring online between now and 2020, just 4 years, will be 2.5 times what the reductions that we're going to receive under the Clean Power Plan. So really, it kind of makes me think that, the president says that, he's proven that he's a world leader because he's willing to fight climate change. No, what it really proves that he's the only world leader willing to sacrifice his economy and the lives of his people for some goal of reducing carbon emissions while the rest of the world continues to produce carbon and emit carbon. It's like in my district alone, in western Kentucky last year in West Kentucky, there were 1,109 coal jobs that were lost. That's 24.9% of the coal jobs that we had. And it didn't stop last year. Matter of fact, just last week, Alliance Coal announced that they gave a warning notice to 400 employees at the Warrior coal plant there, coal company there in Hopkins County. At the same time, they are closing down the Elk Creek operation. It's a mine there that employed about 250 people. They also announced layoffs at the Union County Riverview mine, and they announced layoffs over in southern Illinois. So as this happens, our people are really losing their little sliver of hope, a little light that they have out there for being able to continue their lives and raise their families. And that really, really bothers me. But ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you that just yesterday, someone lit a candle. It was just a small glimmer of hope, a little bit of light, but the United States Supreme Court issued a stay on the president's Clean Power Plan until it can be finalized and sent back to the lower courts. And so at least we do have some good news for the citizens of Kentucky. And I'm very much hopeful that as we stand up and continue to fight, because that's what we have to do, we can't let them take away our freedoms. We can't let them take away our hopes. We can't let them change our way of lives because they think they have a better idea about what should be done here in Kentucky. And so I am very pleased that the Supreme Court made this decision, and I do hope that we can see at least put this thing off until a new administration, someone who doesn't, is not as narcissistic, someone who is not as feels like that they're so much more intelligent than everybody else, someone that really cares about people's lives. You know, and one of the things they do with the Clean Power Plan, they've mentioned that, you know, they give you all the statistics about all the lives that are going to be saved and all the people who won't be breathing this stuff for asthma and all of that. But they never, ever acknowledge that if the increased costs are raised to the point that senior citizens, people on fixed incomes, have to choose between electricity and their medicine, they never acknowledge that there's a health benefit cost to that. They never admit that there's a health benefit cost to some family out there when dad's lost his job and he can't provide the kids with the things that he needs, or they've lost their health insurance. They will never, ever admit that there is a health benefit effect of that. And it's time they start looking at these things and considering every aspect. And I thank you for your time. Thank you.